The commander's order was nice. You're a medic. You will stand down. But protocol was a whisper against the storm in her gut. He saw a woman who patched wounds. He was about to meet the weapon his arrogance forged. Forward operating base sentinel was a scar of sun-bleached concrete and razor wire carved into the heart of the Zargos Mountains. It was a place of simmering tension, not from the distant threat of conflict, but from the suffocating silence of routine. Inside this bubble of controlled monotony, Dr. Evelyn Eve Reed was to most just document at 30, with a calm demeanor and hands that were steady whether suturing a wound or administering in 4. She was a respected, if underestimated, fixture. To Commander Jack Dane, a man whose authority was as sharp and unyielding as the surrounding peaks, she was a box to be ticked, a necessary asset, but one confined to the sterile world of the infirmary. He saw her slight frame and quiet professionalism and filed her away under non-combatant. A fatal miscalculation. Buried deep in Eve's classified service record, and buried even deeper in her soul, was a legacy few knew. Her father, Colonel Michael Spector Reed, was a ghost, a legend in the clandestine world of special operations sniping. He was a man who could read wind currents in the dance of dust devils and calculate bullet drop with the instinct of a predator. He never took on official protégés, except one. Eve had grown up not in suburbs, but in the sprawling, windswept plains of Montana, where her father taught her the science of the unseen. She learned to measure distance with her eyes, to control her breathing until her heartbeat was the only metronome that mattered, to understand that a rifle was not a weapon of aggression, but an instrument of absolute precision. She had tried to bury that part of herself when she chose medicine, a path to heal rather than harm. But some lessons are etched into your DNA. The warning didn't arrive through official channels. It materialized on a repurposed, encrypted data slate she'd pieced together from salvaged drone parts. A personal project to keep her mind sharp. The screen, usually dormant, flickered to life with a string of anonymous, ghost-coded data. // SIG _int anomaly detected. Route _gamma. Grid 88.41. Overwatch _PUS _valor. Blind _spot analysis. Negative. Canyon echo _7. Vulnerability probability. 97.8%. / Eve went cold. The message was a phantom, untraceable, yet it confirmed a chilling suspicion she'd harbored for days. She had studied the mission schematics for Operation Serpent's Coil, a critical supply run, and noted the same vulnerability. Overwatch position Valor, perched on a high ridge, had a perfect line of sight into the convoy's path, but it had a glaring blind spot. A narrow, winding defile they called Echo 7 Canyon, an ideal channel for an ambush. The cold dread was sickeningly familiar. It was the same icy grip she'd felt 5 years prior in a dusty corner of the world, when a young Marine lay bleeding on her gurney. She had seen internal hemorrhaging the field monitor missed, but protocol demanded a senior surgeon's confirmation. That confirmation came 20 minutes too late. She had followed the rules, and a life was lost. Never again. The next morning, she approached Commander Dane in the Tactical Operations Center, the mission overlay glowing on the central holodeble. She kept her voice steady, professional. Sir, with respect, I've analyzed the topography for Operation Serpent's Coil. Overwatch Valor has a significant blind spot at Echo 7 Canyon. I believe it presents an unacceptable risk. Dane didn't even look up from his terminal. His fingers continued their rhythmic tapping. Dr. Reed, your responsibility is the health and readiness of my soldiers. It is not terrain analysis. The plan is set. The intel is clear. You are dismissed. The finality in his tone was a slammed door. Her warning, the ghost in the code, the echo of a past failure. All of it was dismissed without a second thought. She returned to the quiet solitude of her infirmary. The hum of the medical equipment, a poor substitute for the screaming in her gut. Later that night, the data slate blinked once more. A new line of code appeared, sharp, final, and personal. // they won't listen. The ghosts are watching. You see it. Act, //. She stared at the glowing green text. It was no longer a warning. It was a mandate. And somewhere in the sterile quiet of the room, she heard her father's voice, a memory as clear as day. Precision, Evie, is what's left when chaos takes everything else. The air in FOB, Sentinel, grew thick with more than just dust and heat. Rumors, like desert winds, found their way into every corner. The whispers started at the firing range. Saw Doc Reed at the pistol range last night, muttered Sergeant Wrench Miller, the team's lead mechanic, to his spotter. After hours, popped 3 bullseyes at 50 meters like she was swatting flies. Never seen a medic shoot like that. The spotter, a younger soldier named Cortez, grunted. Heard she's Spectre's kid. You know the Spectre. A low whistle. No kidding? Thought that was just a myth. The whispers followed Eve to the mess hall. Conversations would halt mid-sentence as she passed. Glances were no longer casual. They were calculating. She was no longer the invisible, reliable document. She was an anomaly, a puzzle they couldn't solve. The respect she'd earned for her medical skill was now tinged with a wary, suspicious curiosity. They were seeing the ghost of her father, not the woman standing before them. By sundown, the rumors had slithered their way to Commander Dane's ears. He didn't confront her. There was no shouting match, no public dressing down. His response was colder, more insidious. An email, delivered with bureaucratic detachment, appeared on her terminal. Subject, Directive 4A, Weapons Handling and Personnel Roles. Effective immediately. Specialist Reed is restricted from all live-fire exercises and weapons ranges outside of standard sidearm qualification. Her duties are confined to medical support only. Any deviation will result in a formal disciplinary review and potential reassignment. Eve read the words in the stark light of her screen. Each one was a brick in a wall being built around her. The skills her father had painstakingly taught her were now contraband. The warning she tried to give was now the source of her punishment. The truth she saw was deemed a liability. A wave of fury, hot and sharp, washed over her, followed by a profound sense of despair. They weren't just ignoring the threat. They were actively silencing the one person who saw it. The convoy was still scheduled to roll out at 0600. The soldiers, men and women she'd shared meals with, patched up, and cared for, were still walking into that canyon. And no one in a position of power was doing a damn thing about it. She looked at her data slate. The last message pulsed with a soft, accusing glow. You see it. Act. It was a choice. Obey the commander who was leading his team into a slaughter, or honor the legacy of the man who taught her how to prevent one. She pulled out a worn, leather-bound journal from a locked footlocker. Inside weren't diary entries, but pages filled with her father's handwriting, complex ballistic charts, wind reading diagrams, and notes on breathing techniques. On the last written page, a single sentence was underlined twice. The most important shot is the one you take when no one else will. She closed the book. The fury and despair receded, replaced by a chilling calm. A purpose. Dane had built a wall of protocol around her. He was about to find out she knew how to tear it down. 0600 hours. The desert air was cool and thin. The engines of the armored convoy rumbled to life, a low growl that vibrated through the base. Operation Serpent's Coil was underway. On the mission overlay in the infirmary, Eve watched the green icons representing the convoy begin their slow crawl across the map, heading directly for the red flag zone of Echo 7 Canyon. Her gut twisted into a knot of cold dread. Every instinct screamed at her. This was the moment, the point of no return. She could stand here, surrounded by sterile gauze and life-saving equipment, and wait for the casualties to arrive. Or she could become the intervention. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, not as a whisper, but as a command. You don't wait for permission to prevent a mistake. You prevent it, or you own the consequences for the rest of your life. She grabbed her trauma pack, her official reason for being anywhere, and sprinted from the infirmary. She didn't run towards the motor pool or the armory. She ran straight for the heart of the beast, the Tactical Operations Center. She burst through the tent flap. The room went silent. All eyes turned to her. Commander Dane stood hunched over the holodeble, his face illuminated by the tactical display. "Sir," Eve's voice was sharp, cutting through the low hum of electronics. "I request permission to join the Overwatch Valor team. I have reason to believe they will need immediate medical support." Dane straightened up slowly. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face, quickly replaced by a condescending smirk. He looked at her as if she were a child who had wandered into a board meeting. "Dr. Reed, we've been over this. Your place is here. The Valor team is composed of my most elite marksmen. They are not in need of a babysitter." "It's not babysitting, it's a tactical flaw," she countered, her voice rising with an urgency she couldn't suppress. "Echo, 7 is a kill box. If they're engaged from that canyon, Valor's position is compromised. They'll be trapped." A low chuckle came from one of the other officers in the room. Dane's smirk widened. "A kill box? You've been reading too many field manuals, Doctor. I have absolute confidence in my team. Now return to your post." That's a direct order. This was it. The final wall. The absolute refusal to see. Eve looked him dead in the eye. The calm she had cultivated for years shattered, replaced by the icy resolve of her father. And what happens when confidence meets reality? Commander? Who will be there to put them back together when your plan fails? The room was tomb silent. No one had ever spoken to Dane like that. His face hardened, the condescension evaporating into pure, cold fury. "You are on thin ice, Specialist." His voice was dangerously low. "One more word, and I will have you confined to quarters under guard." Eve held his gaze for a beat longer. She saw the unshakable arrogance, the pride that would cost men their lives. And in that moment, she made her choice. She gave a single, sharp nod. "Understood, sir." And she turned on her heel and walked out of the TOC. But she didn't head back to the infirmary. She walked with a purpose that was terrifying in its clarity, her path set not by the base layout, but by a map only she could see. She was heading for the motor pool. She was heading for the ridge. She was heading for the rifle. The order had been given, and she was about to break it into a million pieces. The 27 meters from the command tent to the unmarked maintenance vehicle felt like a mile. Every step was a severing of ties, to protocol, to her assigned role, to the career she had so carefully built. With each stride, the medic receded and the ghost of her father emerged. This wasn't about proving Dane wrong anymore. It was about saving the lives he was so willing to risk. She didn't hesitate. The keys to the desert transport, a rugged, sand-colored utility vehicle, were exactly where she knew they'd be. No markings, no comms link to the TOC, just a full tank of fuel and the grit to disappear. She drove, not with panic, but with a cold, calculated efficiency, her route skirting the base's main thoroughfares, using service roads and the natural cover of the terrain. By the time she reached the foothills of the Valor Ridge, the distant, rhythmic thud of rotor blades had faded, replaced by the whistle of the wind. And then another sound, a sharp, ugly crack that echoed through the canyons. Gunfire. She abandoned the vehicle and began the ascent on foot. The climb was brutal, a steep scramble over loose shale and jagged rock. Her lungs burned, but her body, conditioned by years of disciplined training, responded. She moved with a climber's economy of motion, her trauma pack a heavy but familiar weight on her back. As she neared the summit, the sounds of battle became terrifyingly clear. The sharp, controlled bursts of the Overwatch team's rifles and the chaotic, high-pitched chatter of enemy AKs. Then, a sound that made her blood run cold. The sickening thump of a mortar launch, followed by a deafening explosion near the ridgeline. A voice, frantic and raw, crackled over a stray comm frequency she picked up on her personal radio. "Ghost 1 is hit. I repeat, Ghost 1 is down. We're taking heavy fire from the canyon. They're all over us." She pushed harder, her muscles screaming in protest. Cresting the final rise, she saw the scene of devastation. Sergeant Marcus Ghost 1 Cole, the team's leader, was slumped over his rifle, a dark, spreading stain on his side. His spotter, Corporal Diaz, was pinned down behind a sliver of rock, firing desperately into the ravine below. And there, half buried in dust and rock from the mortar blast, lay the team's lifeline. The Barrett M82. A .50 caliber beast, silent and waiting. Eve didn't shout a warning. She moved. She slid in beside Cole, her hands a blur of motion before Diaz could even register her presence. Tourniquet. Pressure dressing. Starting a line, she narrated in a low, calm voice, her fingers finding veins and arteries with practiced ease. Stay with me, Sergeant. You're not checking out today. Diaz stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief. Doc, what the hell are you? His words died in his throat. Because after stabilizing Cole, Eve stood up and walked to the Barrett. The way she dropped into a prone position, behind it was not the awkward fumbling of a medic. It was a fluid, single motion of bone and muscle and memory. The way her hand cleared the debris from the action, the way she checked the scope's alignment, the way her cheeks settled against the stock as if it were a long-lost extension of her own body. Diaz knew. In that instant, he wasn't looking at a doctor. He was looking at a predator. Eve peered through the high-powered scope, and there they were, a dozen enemy fighters, moving with confidence through Echo 7 Canyon, setting up a kill zone for the approaching convoy. Just as she'd warned, just as no one had listened, her fingers slid over the trigger. Her world narrowed to the reticle and the rhythm of her own body. Wind, 3 o'clock, 8 knots. Elevation, 1,400 meters. Drop, 22 inches. Heartbeat there. Hold a breath. She found the silent space between one beat and the next, and squeezed. The roar of the Barrett M82 was a physical blow, a shockwave that ripped through the thin mountain air. It was the sound of a god clearing his throat. Down in the canyon, a figure crumpled, not in a spray of blood, but with the clean finality of a switch being flipped off. One shot, one kill. Corporal Diaz stared, speechless. He was a trained spotter, and he hadn't even had time to call the shot. He was already working the bolt, the motion smooth, practiced, impossibly fast. The heavy brass casing ejected, spinning through the air with a soft metallic ring. She was already acquiring her next target. Target 2, moving behind the rock formation, 1450 meters, she murmured, more to herself than to Diaz. Her voice was a dead calm, an unnerving counterpoint to the thunder she was unleashing. Crack. A second fighter, who thought he was in cover, dropped. What the hell? Diaz finally managed to breathe. He thought the rock was concealment, not just cover. Eve said, her eye never leaving the scope. He was wrong. Crack. A third. This one was a running target. An almost impossible shot. He fell mid-stride. Down in the canyon, the ambush dissolved into chaos. The hunters had become the hunted. They had no idea where the fire was coming from, only that it was impossibly accurate and utterly devastating. They broke cover, running for their lives. It only made them easier targets. Crack, crack, crack. Each shot was a sentence. Each impact was a full stop. It wasn't a firefight. It was a clinical, brutal dissection. Behind her, Diaz had stopped trying to fire his own weapon. He was simply watching, bearing witness to something that defied belief. This wasn't just marksmanship. This was artistry. Back at FOB Sentinel, the TOC was in chaos. The convoy lead's voice was a panicked shout over the comms. We're taking sporadic fire, but the main ambush is broken. Something's happening on that ridge. Overwatch is surgical. I don't know who you've got up there, Commander, but they're a damn ghost. Commander Dane stood frozen, his knuckles white where he gripped the holodable. The Valor Ridge wasn't supposed to be this effective. The team was supposed to be pinned down, fighting for their lives. And the only person he knew who had gone that way was the medic he had threatened and dismissed. Then Diaz's voice, breathless and raw, cut through the static. Sir, it's Reed. It's Doc Reed on the Barrett. She's ending it. Silence. Not the silence of confusion or denial. It was the heavy, crushing silence of recognition. The system Dane had built his entire career on, a rigid hierarchy of roles and ranks, had just been shattered by the one person he had deemed insignificant. He tried to put her in a box, and she had just used it as a sniper's nest. On the ridge, the last shot echoed into nothingness. Eve worked the bolt one last time, clearing the chamber. She lay behind the silent rifle, the smell of cordite sharp in her nostrils. Her hands, stained with Sergeant Cole's blood and the grime of gunpowder, were finally shaking, the adrenaline starting to recede. She keyed her radio, her voice steady. "Convoy, this is Valor. Threat is neutralized. The corridor is clear. Proceed with the mission." The silence that followed was absolute. The storm had passed. The thunder of inbound rotor blades was the first sound to break the newfound peace on the ridge. A matte black Chinook helicopter, bearing no standard unit markings, descended like a bird of prey. This wasn't a medical evacuation. It was a reckoning. The ramp lowered, and Commander Dane stepped out first. He wore no helmet, carried no weapon. He walked through the dust-choked air, his face an unreadable mask, and stopped 3 paces from where Eve still lay behind a Barrett. She didn't get up, but she turned her head to meet his gaze. The silence between them was heavy with the weight of his failure and her defiance. "I gave you a direct order, specialist," he said, his voice quiet, stripped of its usual arrogance. Eve nodded slowly. "Yes, sir, you did." His eyes drifted from her face to the massive rifle, then to the neat row of 10 spent .50 caliber casings lined up beside her, and finally to the blood caked on her gloves, the blood of the man she had saved before saving everyone else. "You should be court-martialed for this," he stated. A fact, not a threat. "Yes, sir," she agreed, her voice even. "But the truth is," Dane continued, his voice cracking almost imperceptibly, "you should have been on this ridge from the very beginning. I was wrong." Before Eve could process his admission, another figure emerged from the chopper. A woman in a crisp, gray uniform with the insignia of Special Operations Command. Her face was sharp, intelligent, and held an authority that dwarfed Dane's. "Dr. Reed," the woman said, her voice calm and precise. "I'm General McCoy. I've been monitoring the ghost comms and the after-action logs. 12 confirmed hostiles eliminated. 0 friendly casualties. Convoy secure. An impressive piece of work." She walked closer, her eyes taking in the entire scene. "You have your father's eyes." Eve's breath caught in her throat. "Michael Reed was a friend," McCoy continued softly. "He told me about his daughter, the one who could outshoot any of his trainees but chose to heal instead. He called you his greatest paradox." Tears welled in Eve's eyes, blurring the harsh lines of the desert landscape. McCoy turned to Dane. "Commander, your failure to heed credible intelligence nearly cost us this entire operation. Your command is hereby suspended, pending a full inquiry. You will be replaced." And she looked back at Eve. "This isn't a case of insubordination. It's a case study in untapped potential. We're not punishing you, Doctor. We're promoting you." She extended a hand. "Effective immediately, you're being reassigned. A new unit is being formed. A rapid response team that blends elite medical skills with tactical overwatch. We need a leader. Your call sign will be Paradox. Welcome to the Ghosts." As the Chinook lifted off, carrying away a broken commander and a wounded sergeant who would live, Eve stood alone on the ridge she was never supposed to be on, beside the rifle she was never supposed to touch. She had saved the people who never believed she could. The wind whispered through the canyon, and for the first time, it didn't sound like a warning. It sounded like a welcome home. This story shows that respect isn't about the role someone holds, but the skill and courage they possess. True leaders listen, and true heroes often come from the places we least expect. What do you think is the most important quality in a leader? Let us know in the comments below, and if this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe for more. And as always, comment respect.